They looked at me across that polished conference table like I'd just asked them to fund my vacation to Mars. $1,200, that's what I requested as my annual raise, the cost of their catered lunch meetings for a single week. The silence that followed my request was so thick you could have cut it with a server blade. Then Marcus Chen, our CEO, leaned back in his leather chair and actually laughed. $1,200, he repeated as if the number itself was a punchline. Sarah, you're lucky to have a job in this economy. Maybe focus on gratitude instead of greed. What he didn't know, what none of them knew, was that in 18 hours, their $92 million product launch would either make them legends or destroy their company forever. And I was the only person on Earth who could determine which way that scales would tip. My name is Sarah Chen, no relation to our CEO despite the shared surname, and this is the story of how a $1,200 insult cost them everything they'd worked for. I've been the backbone of Nexus Technologies for 7 years, though if you asked management, they'd probably struggle to remember my name. Senior Systems Engineer, according to my business cards, but that title barely scratches the surface of what I actually do. I design, build, and maintain the infrastructure that keeps this company running. Every server that processes our data, every network connection that links our offices, every backup system that protects us from catastrophic failure. I engineered it, I implemented it, and I keep it running 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. When executives sleep peacefully in their suburban mansions, I'm the reason they wake up to functioning systems instead of smoking ruins. The journey to that conference room confrontation began 3 years ago when Nexus landed the contract that would define our future. Meridian Automotive, one of the largest car manufacturers in the world, wanted to completely overhaul their supply chain management system. They were tired of delays, cost overruns, and inefficiencies that were costing them hundreds of millions annually. What they needed was a comprehensive software solution that could track every component, predict every potential bottleneck, and optimize logistics across 17 countries and 43 manufacturing facilities. It was the kind of project that could transform Nexus from a mid-tier software company into an industry leader. The proposed timeline was aggressive: 18 months to design, develop, test, and deploy a system that would revolutionize how Meridian managed their global operations. The financial stakes were enormous: $92 million in initial development contracts, with ongoing licensing fees that could reach into the hundreds of millions over the next decade. For Nexus, this wasn't just a project. It was a lottery ticket to the big leagues, but lottery tickets are only valuable if you can collect the winnings, and collecting meant delivering a flawless system on an impossible deadline. That's where I came in. While the software development teams focused on user interfaces and business logic, someone needed to build the infrastructure that would support a system managing supply chains for a global automotive giant. This wasn't a typical web application that could run on standard cloud services. Meridian's requirements demanded custom hardware configurations, specialized networking protocols, and redundancy systems that could handle catastrophic failures without losing a single transaction. The infrastructure needed to be more reliable than most hospital systems and faster than most financial trading platforms. I spent the first 6 months of the project designing an architecture that could meet Meridian's requirements while staying within our budget constraints. Every component had to be carefully selected, every connection optimized for performance and reliability. I researched hardware vendors, negotiated with data center providers, and designed network topologies that could route traffic across continents with millisecond precision. It was the most complex system I'd ever designed, and it would need to work perfectly from day one. The hardware implementation took another 8 months. I personally supervised the installation of 47 servers across 3 data centers, configured hundreds of network switches, and established secure connections to Meridian's facilities in 17 countries. Every cable was tested, every server configured to my exact specifications, every backup system verified through rigorous testing protocols. I worked 16-hour days for months, debugging connectivity issues that would have been insurmountable for anyone else, optimizing performance parameters that existed only in my head. But the most critical aspect of the infrastructure wasn't the hardware, it was the control systems I built to manage everything. Meridian's supply chain system would need to operate with absolute reliability, which meant someone needed to monitor every component constantly and react instantly to any problems. I designed and implemented a comprehensive management platform that could detect failures before they happened, reroute traffic around problems, and maintain system performance even during maintenance windows. It was a masterpiece of preventive engineering, and it was completely invisible to everyone except me. The management platform included something else that only I knew about: Administrative backdoors that allowed me to access and control every aspect of the system remotely. These weren't security vulnerabilities or malicious code, they were legitimate maintenance tools that every complex system requires. But they were implemented in a way that only I understood, using protocols and authentication methods that I'd developed specifically for this project. In the world of infrastructure management, these kinds of administrative tools are standard practice. You build systems that you can fix quickly when they break, and you make sure you have access to everything you might need to troubleshoot problems. As the launch date approached, the pressure intensified exponentially. Meridian's board had scheduled a comprehensive demonstration for their investors and stakeholders, a live presentation where they would showcase their new supply chain management system to the financial community that funded their operations. The demonstration was scheduled for a Tuesday morning, and it would either validate their $92 million investment or expose it as an expensive failure. Media would be present, analysts would be watching, and investors would be making decisions about Meridian's future based on what they saw. For Nexus, the stakes were equally high. A successful demonstration would establish us as a major player in enterprise software development. The contracts and partnerships that would follow could transform our company into a billion-dollar enterprise. But failure would be catastrophic, not just the loss of current contracts, but the reputation damage that would make future deals nearly impossible. In the software industry, you're only as good as your last major deployment, and a failure of this magnitude would haunt us for years. The weeks leading up to the demonstration were a blur of final testing, system optimization, and crisis management. Every day brought new challenges, connectivity issues that required reconfiguring network protocols, performance problems that demanded hardware upgrades, integration challenges that meant rewriting critical code modules. I was working 20-hour days, sleeping in the office more often than at home, and single-handedly keeping the infrastructure stable while development teams made last-minute changes that could have destabilized everything. Through all of this intense pressure and overwhelming responsibility, I hadn't received a raise in 3 years. Not a cost-of-living adjustment, not a performance bonus, not even a token acknowledgement that my work was keeping the company afloat. My salary had remained frozen while executives celebrated our progress with expensive dinners and weekend retreats. I watched Marcus Chen lease a new Tesla while I drove a 10-year-old Honda with a check engine light that I couldn't afford to fix. I saw other team members receive promotions and bonuses for work that depended entirely on the infrastructure I'd built and maintained. The breaking point came during a company-wide meeting where Marcus announced that Nexus had achieved record profitability for the third consecutive quarter. He attributed our success to visionary leadership, innovative software development, and strategic partnerships with industry leaders. He thanked the sales team for their dedication, the development team for their creativity, and the marketing team for their promotional excellence. He never mentioned the infrastructure team, he never acknowledged the systems that made everything else possible, he never said my name. After the meeting, I calculated exactly how much my work had contributed to those record profits. The Meridian contract alone represented 60% of our annual revenue, and that contract existed only because I'd built an infrastructure capable of supporting their requirements. Other clients had expanded their contracts specifically because of the reliability and performance of our systems. New customers had chosen Nexus over competitors because of our technical capabilities. By any reasonable measure, my work had directly generated millions of dollars in revenue for the company. That's when I decided to request a raise. Not a dramatic increase that would strain the budget, not a demand for equity or executive privileges, just a modest $1,200 annual increase that would acknowledge my contributions and help offset the rising cost of living. It was less than what the company spent on coffee for the executive floor each month. It was a fraction of what they paid for the catered lunches that I was never invited to attend. It was a token amount that would have demonstrated basic respect for the person who kept their technology running. I prepared for the conversation carefully. I documented my contributions over the past 3 years, calculated the revenue directly attributable to my work, and outlined the critical role I played in our current success. I scheduled a meeting with Marcus Chen, prepared talking points that emphasized value creation rather than personal needs, and practiced responses to potential objections. I was asking for recognition, not charity, and I had the track record to justify that recognition. The meeting was scheduled for a Friday afternoon, 5 days before the Meridian demonstration. I walked into Marcus's office carrying a folder of documentation that proved my value to the company, expecting a professional conversation about compensation and career development. What I got instead was a masterclass in corporate disrespect that would cost them everything they'd worked to achieve. Marcus barely looked up from his computer when I entered his office. He gestured vaguely toward the chair across from his desk while continuing to type emails. After several minutes of silence, he finally acknowledged my presence. "Sarah, right, you wanted to discuss something." I felt my jaw clench at the casual dismissal, but I maintained my professional composure. "Yes, Marcus, I wanted to discuss my compensation and role here at Nexus." He leaned back in his chair with the kind of exaggerated patience that managers use when they're humoring subordinates. "What specifically did you want to discuss?" I opened my folder and began explaining my contributions to the company's recent success. The infrastructure I'd built for the Meridian project had exceeded all performance requirements. Our system reliability had improved dramatically under my management, and client satisfaction with our technical capabilities was at an all-time high. I spoke for 10 minutes, presenting clear evidence of my value creation and outlining the reasons why a modest raise was justified. When I finished, Marcus stared at me with the blank expression of someone who'd stopped listening after the first sentence. "So you want more money," he said flatly. "I want my compensation to reflect my contributions to the company's success," I replied carefully. "Specifically, I'm requesting an annual increase of $1,200, which represents less than a 2% adjustment to my current salary." The silence that followed stretched uncomfortably long. Marcus picked up a pen and began clicking it absently while studying my face. Finally, he spoke, and his words hit like ice water. "Sarah, let me explain something about how businesses work. We pay people what they're worth in the marketplace. If you were worth more money, you'd be earning more money. The fact that you're asking for a raise suggests that you don't understand your actual value to this organization." I felt heat rising in my chest, but I kept my voice level. "Marcus, the infrastructure I've built has been critical to our recent success. The Meridian project alone wouldn't be possible without the systems I designed and implemented." He waved his hand dismissively. "The Meridian project is successful because of leadership, strategic vision, and innovative software development. Infrastructure is just plumbing necessary but not particularly valuable. Anyone with basic technical skills could maintain our systems. Anyone with basic technical skills." The words hung in the air like a personal insult. I'd spent 7 years building expertise in complex systems architecture, earned certifications in technologies that most people couldn't even pronounce, and designed infrastructure that was currently supporting a $92 million project. And he just reduced all of that to plumbing maintenance. I tried one more approach. "Marcus, I understand that infrastructure work isn't always visible, but it's fundamental to everything else we do. Without reliable systems, our software can't perform, our clients can't trust us, and our reputation suffers. The work I do protects the company from risks that could cost millions in lost revenue and damaged relationships." He checked his watch with obvious impatience. "Sarah, I'm going to be direct with you. $1,200 might not sound like much to you, but it adds up across the organization. If we gave raises to everyone who thought they deserved one, we'd quickly price ourselves out of the market. You're lucky to have a stable job with good benefits in an uncertain economy. Maybe focus on gratitude instead of greed." Greed? He just called my request for a modest cost of living adjustment greed. I sat there processing the insulting dismissal of my value, the casual disregard for my contributions, and the condescending lecture about gratitude. Marcus had already turned back to his computer, effectively ending the conversation without even the courtesy of a formal rejection. I stood up slowly, gathering my documentation folder that had proven utterly worthless in this conversation. "Thank you for your time, Marcus. I'll certainly think about what you've said." He didn't look up from his screen. "Good, I'm glad we understand each other. Now I need to focus on preparing for next week's demonstration. It's a critical milestone for the company, and I can't afford any distractions." Critical milestone. I walked out of his office thinking about exactly how critical that milestone really was, and who would determine whether it became a triumph or a catastrophe. The Meridian demonstration was scheduled for Tuesday morning at 9 a.m. 60 investors, analysts, and media representatives would watch as Meridian's executives showcased their new supply chain management system. The presentation would begin with a live demonstration of the software's capabilities, followed by detailed explanations of how the system would revolutionize their operations. But the demonstration wasn't just a software presentation, it was a comprehensive showcase of system performance under real-world conditions. Meridian planned to process actual supply chain data during the presentation, showing how the system could handle complex logistics calculations in real time. They would demonstrate the system's ability to optimize shipping routes, predict supply shortages, and coordinate manufacturing schedules across multiple facilities. It was an ambitious technical showcase that would prove their investment was sound. The entire demonstration depended on infrastructure that I had designed, built, and maintained. Every server that would process the data, every network connection that would carry the information, every backup system that would ensure reliability, I had personally configured all of it. The management platform that monitored system performance, detected potential problems, and maintained optimal operations was my creation. Without that infrastructure, the software would be useless code running on non-existent servers. That weekend, I sat in my small apartment, staring at my laptop screen and thinking about $1,200. It was such a modest amount, barely enough to cover my increasing rent, certainly not enough to change my lifestyle significantly. But it represented something much more important than money. It represented recognition, respect, and acknowledgement that my work mattered. Marcus's refusal wasn't just about budget constraints. It was about his fundamental inability to value the expertise that kept his company running. I opened my laptop and logged into the administrative interface for the Meridian infrastructure. The monitoring dashboard showed green status indicators across all systems, servers running optimally, network connections stable, backup systems ready to activate if needed. Everything was perfect, exactly as I'd engineered it to be. The system was ready to support a flawless demonstration that would validate Nexus's capabilities and secure our future in enterprise software development. But as I studied those green status indicators, I realized something that Marcus Chen had never bothered to understand. The infrastructure wasn't just technical hardware, it was a carefully orchestrated system that existed only because I made it exist. Every configuration file, every optimization parameter, every monitoring protocol reflected decisions that I had made based on expertise that I had developed over years of specialized work. The system wasn't separate from me, it was an extension of my knowledge and skills. Monday morning arrived with the usual pre-demonstration chaos. Development teams were conducting final testing, sales teams were rehearsing presentation scripts, and executives were practicing their speeches for the investor audience. I received dozens of emails asking about system status, performance metrics, and contingency plans for potential technical issues. Everyone wanted reassurance that the infrastructure would perform flawlessly during the demonstration. I spent Monday morning monitoring system performance and responding to last-minute requests for technical adjustments. Every component was functioning perfectly, response times were optimal, server loads were well within acceptable ranges, and network connectivity was stable. The infrastructure was ready to support a demonstration that would either establish Nexus as an industry leader or destroy our reputation permanently. At lunch, I received an email from Marcus Chen addressed to all department heads. The subject line read, "Tomorrow's demonstration, critical importance." The message emphasized the significance of the Meridian demonstration for the company's future, outlined expectations for all team members, and stressed the importance of flawless execution. He concluded by saying that everyone at Nexus had contributed to reaching this milestone, and tomorrow would validate our collective efforts. Everyone at Nexus had contributed. I read that line several times, thinking about my conversation with Marcus 3 days earlier. According to him, infrastructure work was just plumbing that anyone with basic technical skills could handle. According to his email, everyone had contributed to our success. The contradiction was striking, but not surprising. Executives often claimed credit for achievements while dismissing the work that made those achievements possible. Monday afternoon, I conducted final system checks and verified that all monitoring protocols were active. The infrastructure was performing perfectly, ready to support a demonstration that could generate hundreds of millions in future contracts. I documented system status, confirmed backup procedures, and ensured that every component would function reliably during the presentation. By 5 p.m., everything was ready for tomorrow's critical milestone. That evening, I sat in my apartment thinking about loyalty, respect, and the true value of technical expertise. For 3 years, I had worked without recognition or appropriate compensation, watching executives celebrate successes that depended entirely on infrastructure they didn't understand. I had built systems that generated millions in revenue while being told that my work was basic maintenance that anyone could perform. Marcus Chen had made his position clear. I wasn't worth $1,200 in additional annual compensation. My expertise wasn't valuable enough to warrant recognition. My contributions weren't significant enough to deserve respect. He had reduced years of specialized work to plumbing maintenance, dismissed my value to the organization, and lectured me about gratitude for having a job that I was apparently lucky to keep. Tuesday morning would prove exactly how valuable my expertise really was. The demonstration was scheduled to begin at 9 a.m. sharp. By 8:30, Meridian's conference room would be filled with investors, analysts, and media representatives waiting to see whether a $92 million investment would validate their confidence or expose their mistake. The presentation would showcase software capabilities that depended entirely on infrastructure that only I fully understood. I opened my laptop and accessed the administrative interface for the Meridian infrastructure. The system status dashboard showed the familiar pattern of green indicators, everything functioning perfectly, ready to support a flawless demonstration. But those green indicators existed only because of configuration decisions that I had made, optimization parameters that I had set, and monitoring protocols that I had implemented. The infrastructure was stable because I maintained it, reliable because I designed it, and functional because I understood it. Marcus Chen believed that anyone with basic technical skills could maintain our systems. Tomorrow morning, he would discover exactly how wrong that assumption was. The infrastructure that supported their $92 million demonstration existed at my discretion, functioned according to my expertise, and continued operating only because I allowed it to continue operating. I had built something remarkable, a technical foundation that could support enterprise-scale operations with absolute reliability. But I had also built something else, something that Marcus had never bothered to investigate. I had built administrative controls that gave me complete authority over every aspect of the infrastructure. Not malicious backdoors or security vulnerabilities, but legitimate management tools that allowed me to configure, monitor, and control the systems I had designed. Those administrative controls meant that I could modify system configurations, adjust performance parameters, or disable components entirely. I could change network routing protocols, alter server configurations, or shut down services remotely. Every aspect of the infrastructure responded to commands that only I could issue, using authentication methods that only I understood. It was comprehensive control over a complex system, and it was exactly what any responsible infrastructure engineer would implement. Tuesday morning at 8 a.m., 1 hour before the scheduled demonstration, I logged into the administrative interface and began implementing changes that would test Marcus Chen's theory about the replaceability of technical expertise. I didn't delete critical data or introduce malicious code. That would have been unprofessional and potentially illegal. Instead, I made subtle configuration adjustments that would create cascading performance problems during high-load operations. I modified network routing protocols to introduce latency spikes during peak traffic periods. I adjusted server memory allocation parameters to create resource conflicts when multiple processes ran simultaneously. I altered database connection pooling settings to generate timeout errors during complex queries. I changed monitoring thresholds to disable automatic recovery systems that would normally resolve performance issues. Every modification was technically legitimate. System administrators make these kinds of adjustments constantly during routine maintenance. The beauty of these changes was their timing and subtlety. Under normal operating conditions, the modifications would have minimal impact on system performance. But during a live demonstration processing real-world data in front of investors, the cumulative effect would be catastrophic. The system would appear functional initially, then degrade rapidly as load increased, ultimately failing completely during the most critical moments of the presentation. At 8:15 a.m., I implemented the final configuration changes and logged out of the administrative interface. The infrastructure was still showing green status indicators. Everything appeared normal to casual observation. But beneath the surface, the system was now configured to fail spectacularly during the exact conditions that would exist during the demonstration. It was a masterpiece of anticipatory sabotage, timed to activate when Marcus Chen needed perfection most. I drove to the office as usual, arriving at 8:30 to find the building buzzing with pre-demonstration activity. Development teams were conducting final tests, executives were reviewing presentation materials, and support staff were preparing the conference room for investor arrivals. Everyone was focused on delivering a flawless demonstration that would validate months of intensive work. At 8:45, I received an urgent email from the operations team. System monitoring was showing some unusual network activity, and they wanted me to investigate potential issues before the demonstration began. I responded that I was reviewing the alerts and would provide updates as needed. In reality, I was watching the early signs of the configuration changes beginning to affect system performance. The demonstration began precisely at 9 a.m. I watched from the operations center as Meridian executives welcomed investors and introduced the new supply chain management system. The presentation started with an overview of current challenges and proposed solutions, followed by detailed explanations of system capabilities. Everything proceeded smoothly during the initial presentations. No technical components were active yet. At 9:20, the live demonstration phase began. Meridian's Chief Technology Officer began showcasing the system's ability to process real supply chain data, optimize logistics calculations, and coordinate manufacturing schedules. For the first few minutes, everything functioned perfectly. The software responded quickly to user inputs, calculations completed within expected timeframes, and data displays updated smoothly. Then the load increased. As the demonstration progressed to more complex scenarios involving multiple manufacturing facilities and thousands of components, the infrastructure began experiencing the performance problems I had engineered. Response times started increasing gradually, just enough to be noticeable but not enough to halt the presentation. The CTO attributed the slight delays to the complexity of the calculations being performed. By 9:30, the problems became more pronounced. Database queries were taking longer to complete, network connections were experiencing intermittent delays, and server resources were reaching capacity limits earlier than expected. The monitoring systems I had modified were failing to trigger automatic recovery protocols, allowing performance degradation to accelerate unchecked. At 9:35, the system encountered its first critical failure. A complex logistics optimization that should have completed in 30 seconds was still processing after 3 minutes. The CTO attempted to restart the calculation, but the system was now experiencing resource conflicts that prevented normal operations. Error messages began appearing on the presentation displays, visible to the entire investor audience. The conference room atmosphere shifted from confident anticipation to nervous concern. Investors began whispering among themselves, analysts were taking notes about technical difficulties, and media representatives were documenting the unfolding crisis. Meridian executives were trying to maintain professional composure while frantically signaling for technical support. My phone started ringing with urgent requests for assistance. The operations team needed immediate help diagnosing system problems, development teams were reporting widespread functionality failures, and executives were demanding explanations for the technical meltdown. I responded to each call with professional concern, explaining that I was investigating multiple system alerts and would provide updates as soon as possible. By 9:45, the demonstration had collapsed completely. The supply chain management system was essentially non-functional, displaying error messages instead of data visualizations, failing to complete basic calculations, and responding to user inputs with timeout errors. The infrastructure that had performed flawlessly for months was now unable to support even simple operations. Meridian's CEO attempted to salvage the situation by explaining that technical difficulties were common during live demonstrations and that the system performed perfectly in controlled testing environments. But the damage was done. Investors had watched a $92 million system fail catastrophically during its most important presentation. The confidence that months of preparation had built evaporated in 25 minutes of technical disasters. The demonstration officially ended at 10 a.m., but investors began leaving much earlier. Conversations in the hallway were brief and uncomfortable, with Meridian executives attempting to schedule follow-up meetings while investors offered polite but non-committal responses. The media representatives who had expected to document a technological breakthrough instead documented a very expensive failure. By 10:30, my phone was ringing constantly with escalating urgency. Marcus Chen personally called demanding immediate resolution of the technical crisis. Development team leaders were reporting that their applications couldn't connect to essential services. Client support was receiving complaints from other customers experiencing system problems. The infrastructure failure was affecting not just the Meridian demonstration, but our entire business operations. I spent the next 2 hours implementing emergency fixes that gradually restored system functionality. Each repair required careful attention to the specific configuration changes I had made, reversing modifications while maintaining the appearance of standard troubleshooting procedures. By noon, most services were operational again, though performance remained suboptimal due to lingering effects of the morning's failures. The post-demonstration analysis began immediately. Meridian executives demanded detailed explanations for the technical failures that had destroyed their investor presentation. Nexus leadership launched a comprehensive investigation into infrastructure problems that had threatened the company's most important client relationship. Everyone wanted to understand how a system that had performed flawlessly for months could fail so completely during its most critical test. I participated in multiple emergency meetings throughout Tuesday afternoon, providing technical explanations for the various failures that had occurred during the demonstration. I described the system alerts I had observed, outlined the troubleshooting procedures I had implemented, and detailed the repairs that had restored functionality. My explanations were technically accurate and professionally delivered, focusing on system complexity and the challenges of maintaining perfect performance under extreme conditions. Wednesday morning brought devastating news about the demonstration's impact. Meridian's stock price had dropped 12% overnight as investors reacted to concerns about their supply chain technology investment. 3 major institutional investors had requested detailed technical audits before proceeding with planned funding commitments. 2 potential partners had postponed integration discussions pending resolution of system reliability concerns. For Nexus, the consequences were even more severe. Meridian's leadership was demanding contract renegotiation to address performance guarantees and penalty clauses. Other clients were questioning our technical capabilities and requesting assurances about system reliability. The sales team reported that several prospective customers had withdrawn from consideration after learning about the demonstration failures. Marcus Chen called an emergency all-hands meeting Wednesday afternoon to address the crisis. The entire company gathered in our main conference room while he attempted to restore confidence in our capabilities and commitment to client success. He acknowledged that Tuesday's demonstration had not met expectations, but emphasized that technical difficulties were temporary setbacks that could be resolved through improved procedures and additional resources. During his presentation, Marcus outlined plans for comprehensive system upgrades, enhanced monitoring protocols, and expanded technical support staff. He stressed that Nexus remained committed to delivering industry-leading solutions and maintaining the highest standards of system reliability. He concluded by saying that every team member was critical to our recovery efforts and that we would emerge stronger from this temporary challenge. After the meeting, I requested a private conversation with Marcus to discuss the infrastructure problems that had caused Tuesday's failures. We met in his office Wednesday evening, with the same configuration as our previous conversation but a dramatically different tone. Marcus was no longer the dismissive executive who had lectured me about gratitude. He was a desperate CEO whose company was facing potential bankruptcy. "Sarah," he said as I entered his office, "thank you for all your work trying to resolve yesterday's issues. I know you've been working around the clock to stabilize our systems. I need to understand exactly what happened during the demonstration so we can prevent similar problems in the future." I settled into the chair across from his desk, noting the scattered papers and empty coffee cups that suggested he hadn't left the office since Tuesday morning. "Marcus," I said carefully, "the infrastructure experienced multiple cascading failures during high-load operations. The combination of complex processing requirements and peak network traffic created resource conflicts that overwhelmed our monitoring systems. It was a perfect storm of technical challenges that exposed vulnerabilities in our current architecture." He leaned forward with desperate attention. "Can you fix these vulnerabilities? What do we need to do to ensure this never happens again?" The question was loaded with implications about budget approvals, resource allocation, and my continued employment. I considered my response carefully, thinking about $1,200 and the value of technical expertise. "The infrastructure needs comprehensive upgrades to handle enterprise-scale operations reliably," I explained. "We need additional servers to distribute processing loads, enhanced network equipment to eliminate bottlenecks, and improved monitoring systems to detect problems before they affect performance. The current architecture was designed for our historical requirements, but it's not adequate for the kind of high-stakes demonstrations we're now conducting." Marcus nodded eagerly. "Whatever you need, Sarah. Budget isn't a constraint when it comes to protecting our client relationships. How quickly can you implement these upgrades?" I studied his face, seeing the same executive who had dismissed my value just 5 days earlier now desperate for my expertise. The transformation was remarkable, from casual arrogance to complete dependence in less than a week. "Marcus," I said slowly, "implementing these upgrades will require significant time and resources. But there's another issue we need to address first. The current infrastructure problems aren't just technical, they're also organizational. Our systems need dedicated management by someone who understands their complexity and can respond quickly to emerging issues." He looked confused. What do you mean by organizational issues? I leaned back in my chair, feeling the weight of the moment. Marcus, 5 days ago, you told me that infrastructure work was basic maintenance that anyone with technical skills could handle. You said my contributions weren't valuable enough to warrant a modest salary adjustment, but Tuesday's demonstration proved exactly how critical infrastructure expertise really is. The silence that followed was profound. Marcus stared at me with the dawning realization that his casual dismissal of my value had directly contributed to the crisis threatening his company. The executive who had lectured me about gratitude was beginning to understand the true cost of failing to value essential expertise. I want to propose a solution that addresses both the technical and organizational issues, I continued. The infrastructure upgrades you're requesting will cost approximately $200,000 and take 6 months to implement fully. But more importantly, those upgrades need to be managed by someone who understands their strategic importance to the company's success. Marcus nodded slowly. What specifically are you proposing? I'm proposing that my role be restructured to reflect the actual scope and importance of infrastructure management, I said. Instead of senior systems engineer, I should be director of infrastructure operations, with compensation that reflects the critical nature of the work and authority to make decisions about system architecture and resource allocation. The conversation continued for another hour, covering technical requirements, organizational structures, and compensation adjustments. By the end of our discussion, Marcus had approved not just the $1,200 raise I had originally requested, but a comprehensive promotion that included a 40% salary increase, expanded authority over infrastructure decisions, and budget approval for the system upgrades needed to prevent future failures. Thursday morning, I began implementing the infrastructure improvements that would actually address the vulnerabilities I had exploited during Tuesday's demonstration. The irony wasn't lost on me. I was now being paid substantially more to fix problems that I had created, using budget approval that had been denied when I requested modest recognition for my contributions. Over the following weeks, I gradually restored the Meridian infrastructure to optimal performance while implementing genuine improvements that would prevent similar failures in the future. The work was complex and time-consuming, but it was also deeply satisfying to build systems that reflected my expertise and commitment to excellence. The Meridian relationship eventually recovered, though it took months of careful relationship management and flawless system performance to rebuild the trust that had been damaged during the demonstration. Other clients remained with Nexus, but demanded enhanced service-level agreements and performance guarantees that reflected the lessons learned from our technical failures. Marcus Chen never explicitly acknowledged the connection between his dismissal of my value and the subsequent infrastructure crisis. But his behavior changed dramatically. He consulted me before making decisions that affected technical operations, approved resource requests without questioning their necessity, and treated infrastructure concerns as strategic priorities rather than operational overhead. 6 months later, Nexus successfully demonstrated an upgraded supply chain management system to a group of international investors. The presentation proceeded flawlessly, with infrastructure performance that exceeded all expectations and showcased capabilities that positioned us as industry leaders. The contrast with our previous demonstration was stark and intentional, a visible reminder of the difference between adequate support and true technical excellence. As I watched that successful demonstration, I reflected on the strange journey that had brought us to that point. A $1,200 request for recognition had been dismissed as greed by an executive who didn't understand the value of specialized expertise. That dismissal had led to a catastrophic failure that nearly destroyed the company, followed by a dramatic reversal that established infrastructure management as a strategic priority. The lesson wasn't lost on anyone who had witnessed the sequence of events. Technical expertise isn't just operational support, it's the foundation that makes everything else possible. Systems don't maintain themselves, infrastructure doesn't optimize itself, and complex technology doesn't function reliably without someone who understands its intricacies completely. The most satisfying moment came during our quarterly company meeting, where Marcus presented our recovery from the Meridian crisis as a testament to organizational resilience and strategic leadership. He outlined the infrastructure improvements we had implemented, praised the technical expertise that had made our recovery possible, and acknowledged the critical importance of investing in the people who maintain our technological capabilities. As he spoke, I thought about the $1,200 that had started this entire sequence of events. Such a small amount of money, barely enough to cover a modest cost of living adjustment, but it had represented something much larger, recognition of value, respect for expertise, and acknowledgement that technical work deserves compensation that reflects its importance. Marcus's refusal to provide that recognition had cost the company far more than he could have imagined. The infrastructure crisis had resulted in direct costs exceeding $3 million, lost revenue from delayed contracts, emergency consulting fees for system recovery, legal expenses for contract renegotiation, and premium payments for expedited hardware upgrades. The indirect costs were even higher: damaged reputation with clients, lost opportunities with prospective customers, decreased investor confidence, and the time and energy required to rebuild relationships that had been damaged by technical failures. But perhaps the most significant cost was the lesson about the true value of specialized expertise. Marcus had learned that dismissing technical contributions as basic maintenance was not just disrespectful, it was dangerously naive. Infrastructure work requires deep knowledge, careful attention to detail, and the kind of experience that comes from years of managing complex systems under pressure. You can't automate expertise, outsource institutional knowledge, or replace specialized skills with generic technical support. The transformation of my role at Nexus reflected this new understanding. As Director of Infrastructure Operations, I now had authority over all technical decisions that affected system performance, budget approval for hardware and software acquisitions, and direct input into strategic planning processes. My compensation had increased by 60% from my original salary, including not just the $1,200 raise I had initially requested, but substantial adjustments that reflected the actual value of my contributions. More importantly, I had earned something that money couldn't buy: respect for my expertise and recognition of my importance to the company's success. Executives now consulted me before making decisions that could affect system performance. Other departments requested my input on projects that had technical components. My recommendations were implemented without question, and my concerns were treated as strategic priorities rather than operational details. The infrastructure improvements I implemented over the following year transformed Nexus into a genuinely reliable technology provider. Our systems consistently outperformed client expectations, our uptime statistics became industry-leading, and our technical capabilities became a competitive advantage that distinguished us from other software companies. The investment in infrastructure excellence generated returns that far exceeded the costs of implementation. We secured 3 major new contracts specifically because prospective clients were impressed by our system reliability and performance capabilities. Existing clients expanded their agreements to take advantage of enhanced services that weren't available from our competitors. Industry analysts began citing Nexus as an example of how proper infrastructure management could drive business success in the enterprise software market. The Meridian relationship not only recovered but flourished. Their supply chain management system became a model implementation that we showcased to other prospective clients. They expanded their contract to include additional manufacturing facilities and requested custom modifications that generated millions in additional revenue. The partnership that had nearly ended in disaster became one of our most successful client relationships. During our second annual demonstration for Meridian investors, the system performed flawlessly. Complex logistics calculations completed in seconds, real-time data processing handled peak loads without degradation, and the user interface responded instantly to every input. The investors who had witnessed our previous failure were amazed by the transformation, and several commented specifically on the dramatic improvement in system reliability and performance. After that successful demonstration, Meridian's CEO personally thanked me for the technical excellence that had made their success possible. He acknowledged that infrastructure work was often invisible to business leaders, but emphasized that our system's reliability had become a competitive advantage that differentiated Meridian from their competitors. It was exactly the kind of recognition that Marcus Chen should have provided years earlier. The irony of the situation wasn't lost on me. I had sabotaged a demonstration to prove my value, then spent months building genuinely excellent systems that validated that value through legitimate means. The crisis I had created had forced everyone to recognize expertise they had previously ignored, but the recovery I had engineered proved that recognition was deserved through authentic technical excellence. Marcus never directly acknowledged the connection between his dismissal of my $1,200 raise request and the subsequent infrastructure crisis, but his behavior demonstrated that he understood the lesson completely. He never again questioned the value of technical expertise, never dismissed infrastructure concerns as operational details, and never suggested that specialized work could be handled by anyone with basic skills. The story became something of a legend within the company, though the details were never fully disclosed. Employees understood that disrespecting technical expertise could have serious consequences, that infrastructure work was more complex than it appeared, and that the people who maintained our systems deserved recognition for their specialized knowledge. It was a cultural shift that improved how we treated all technical staff, not just infrastructure management. 2 years after the demonstration crisis, I received a job offer from a major technology company that would have doubled my salary and provided equity options worth potentially millions. The offer was tempting, representing opportunities for career advancement and financial security that would have been unimaginable when I was struggling to get a $1,200 raise approved. But I declined the offer and remained at Nexus, not because the money wasn't attractive, but because I had built something valuable that extended beyond personal compensation. The infrastructure I had designed was the foundation for genuine business success. The systems I maintained enabled innovation, supported growth, and protected the company from technological risks that could destroy years of progress. More importantly, I had established a culture of respect for technical expertise that benefited everyone who worked in specialized roles. Future engineers wouldn't have to fight for recognition of their contributions or justify their value through dramatic demonstrations of indispensability. The organizational changes that resulted from our infrastructure crisis had created an environment where expertise was valued, technical work was respected, and specialized knowledge was compensated appropriately. The $1,200 that Marcus had refused to approve as a modest raise had ultimately cost Nexus more than $3 million in direct expenses and immeasurable amounts in reputation damage and lost opportunities. But it had also taught everyone invaluable lessons about the true cost of failing to value expertise, the importance of infrastructure to business success, and the danger of dismissing specialized work as basic maintenance. As I sit in my office today, looking at monitoring displays that show green status indicators across all our systems, I sometimes think about that conversation in Marcus's office where he lectured me about gratitude and marketplace value. He was right about one thing: businesses do pay people what they're worth, but he was catastrophically wrong about understanding what technical expertise is actually worth to a company that depends on complex systems for its survival. The infrastructure that supports Nexus's operations exists because I designed it, functions because I maintain it, and performs reliably because I understand its every component. That knowledge isn't replaceable by basic technical skills or generic maintenance procedures. It's specialized expertise that took years to develop and represents genuine value to any organization that depends on technology for competitive advantage. Marcus learned that lesson the hard way, through a crisis that nearly destroyed his company and cost millions to resolve. But he did learn it, and the changes that resulted from that learning have made Nexus a better place to work and a more successful technology provider. Sometimes the most expensive education produces the most valuable knowledge, even when the tuition is paid through crisis rather than planning. The monitoring systems show that all infrastructure components are functioning optimally, ready to support whatever challenges and opportunities the future might bring. But unlike before, everyone understands that those green status indicators don't maintain themselves. They exist because someone with specialized knowledge makes them exist, and that knowledge deserves recognition, respect, and compensation that reflects its true value to the organization. They denied me $1,200 because they thought I wasn't worth it. 18 hours later, their $92 million launch collapsed because they learned exactly how much I was actually worth. The difference between those two valuations taught everyone lessons about expertise, respect, and the true cost of failing to